All right, hello everyone. My name is Anaiya Raisinghani with MongoDB Ventures, and I'm super excited to introduce that today we have a very special guest, Rabi, today from Thesis. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I would love for you to introduce yourself to all of our viewers today.
Right, and I'll try to keep it super short. And I'm Rabi. I'm the co-founder CEO of Thesis. And at Thesis, we are building the generative UI infrastructure for the next generation of AI apps.
Very cool. Can you give us a very brief description of what exactly Thesis is?
Sure. So Thesis started from a very personal pain point that Parikshit and I had when we were like building an AI agent, an AI application in our last company. Like most AI applications just stop at text. And even like when you can bring in data, for example, if you ask it something like show me my quarterly sales from last Q2 of 2024, it will fetch in the data, but it will just like dump it as a raw text response, right?
Yeah.
And converting that to a more interactive, a more like visual thing was a very brittle process. And it took a lot of time on the developer side to go through all possible combinations, think through what edge cases there are, right? So we said, hey, like this is not a scalable method, especially not in the AI world. So what if we think of UI also as the infrastructure that gets generated based on each query, based on each context, rather than like something that is hard-coded by developers.
All right, so for those of some of the audience members who may have never heard of generative UI before, can you just briefly go over exactly what it is?
Sure. And let's take a consumer use case for this time. Like for example, when you are shopping, right? By the time you land on an e-commerce website, you have already pretty much made up your mind in terms of what you want to buy, especially for high ticket values, right? What you're doing, if you think about your journey, is you're not directly jumping to a e-commerce like website, but you are more starting from a Google search, or you're starting from a Reddit search, right? Where you are looking at an interface which is more optimized for search than an interface which is more optimized for, let's say, reviews. And then probably you are building an Excel sheet where you are noting the pros and cons of each, the costs, etc. By the time you actually land up on the e-commerce website, the decision is pretty much made. So if this entire journey were to be built with a generative UI engine, it would figure out the right interface based on your context. Like, are you looking more at a search-like interface, or are you trying to compare different products, etc., right? Versus right now, these are like very disjointed apps. These are very disjointed experiences. And if you could have an intent engine that recognizes what you're trying to do and build that right interface for you, that would be what generative UI means.
So, Rabi, I know that a lot of people confuse generative UI with AI assistants. Can you kind of explain and break down the difference between those two?
Let me try. And we get asked this a lot. So let me try my best. So in the dashboard analogy that I was just giving you, right? An AI coding assistant, like let's say a cursor or a lovable or whatnot, they help you build the dashboard much faster, but it's still a dashboard.
Yeah.
Like they're making the lives of a developer much easier, but for the end user who is actually using the dashboard, there's nothing that's happening there. It's still as a dashboard. So that's what AI assisted design or AI assisted coding would do. Like it would take current processes and just like make them faster, make them smoother and whatnot. Versus generative UI is a different paradigm where we are asking the fundamental question, why do you even need a dashboard in the first place? Right?
Yeah.
Like if the purpose of a dashboard is to help you answer business queries, we'll just generate the right interface for that specific business query on the fly. So that's like very different way of thinking about it. And it's just think of it this way, like with generative UI, you kind of give power to your end users. With AI assisted coding or AI assisted design, you're giving powers to your development team or your design team.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about where like Gen UI came from, or some of the more like basic kind of roadblocks to it? And then can you go into how Thesis is solving this problem?
Sure, 100%. So actually, I'm not very sure where that term generative UI came from, because there are papers talking about this concept even as back as like 2014 and like before that. So the idea is pretty like I wouldn't call it old, but in terms like it's a pretty fairly well understood research term, right? And what has changed in the last few years, in the last like 2-3 years, is like we finally have an intent engine that is powerful enough to not just understand what you write, but understand the intent behind it and answer things, right? And that would be the entire generative UI, the generative AI revolution that we are in currently, right? So the biggest roadblock I would say, like between 2014 and 2022 or 2021, was like there was no engine that could understand intent.
Yeah.
And now that we have that intent, there are a lot of things that are also falling into place. For example, UI has become one of those bottlenecks in every company that takes a lot of time to develop, and everyone is like building the same set of buttons and accordions and whatnot. So there is a push from within the company also to automate some parts of it.
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, the user behavior is changing in the sense that people are no longer just interested in like going to a menu, filling out a form, etc. They just want to talk to the machine. They just want to like express in natural language what they want, right? And this change of paradigm plus the like technological progress that we had, this all comes together in the last like a couple of years. So this is like finally possible more than just a research thing.
Very cool. I know that I was reading one of your resources on your page and I saw that you had the little like Microsoft paperclip. Will you talk a little bit about that and how that's related to generative UI? I know.
Oh, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So that blog is by Parikshit, and like Parikshit keeps on writing a lot about generative UI and what it would mean, even like beyond where we are as a company currently, where we want it to be, right? And I think that Clippy thing that he was talking about was like the first like assistant, so to say,
Yeah.
the first white space assistant that would just pop up inside your Microsoft Word, Microsoft other places inside the software stack, and it would just ask you, hey, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And guide you through it, right?
Yeah.
So I think like he was drawing an analogy of how that was like the first very like primitive version of assistants to where we are right now with ChatGPT and all these AI assistants, and the like amount of progress that has happened in like what like last 20 years, 25 years just seems mind-boggling at times. But finally, I think what he drives at in that blog is we are at that point where the interface itself, like Clippy was still an assistant that was helping you with a static interface, but now we are at that point where the interface itself can be so dynamic that you don't need a Clippy-like assistant.
Yeah. All right. So, Rabi, you talked a lot about how, we're saving intent and you're dealing with a lot of intent from users. Can you talk a little bit about how you're saving all of that data and
Right.
in your infrastructure in Thesis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think if I have to break down my infrastructure, I would do it in two parts: the inference plane and the control plus management plane. Right? The inference plane is the life cycle of a LLM request. So we run like a high throughput, minimum latency possible pipeline for that. But pretty much everything else in the control plane, in the management plane, is built on top of Mongo. And that has been like one of our lifesavers, that there's a huge part of a stack that we don't worry about. It just works, it just scales, it just gives us the flexibility to change things dynamically. As you can imagine, we are a startup, so things are changing almost pretty much every day.
Yeah.
So that part is stored in MongoDB. And then like the intent, like I was talking about, the intent, the generation history, the conversation history that led to this generation, those part of those things are stored in Mongo Atlas and served to the rest of the customer base.
Very nice. And I know that especially with something like generative UI and Thesis, it's so flexible and so changing. So does that help a lot with how your current infrastructure stack is with MongoDB?
Right, absolutely. I mean, even beyond that, I think for the management plane, also things are very changing at a very rapid pace. What I mean by that is like, for example, when we started off, we didn't have a BYOK solution. So all the control plane basically like injected the key directly. But as we grew, like more people wanted BYOK, more people wanted an on-prem kind of deployment. So the management plane requirement itself changes so rapidly, and having it based in Mongo helps us like really like push forward with the core business problems that we are solving, knowing that the part of the stack is healthy, that part of stack is just as dynamic, and like it can support us no matter how much we grow.
Yeah, love that. And so how do you ensure like overall performance and scalability as your generated UI components and just your general session data grow? Because I know that you have a lot of enterprise customers now at this point, right?
So basically that inference plane that I talked about is pretty stateless.
Yeah.
Like in that plane itself, we are not storing any conversation history, we are not storing any generations, and that is done by our customers, right? But like I said, I mean, on the management plane, on the control plane itself, there are a lot of things that we have to do. For example, like user management, API key management, billing, plans, metering for those plans, etc. So those things have been like pretty easy to scale with Mongo, I would say, because and we use Atlas here. So Atlas helps us like have that peace of mind that it continuously scales up, and we can have very spiky traffic at times, that it would like effortlessly scale up. It would take care of just these like upgrades, version upgrades, and like the quality of life of using something like Atlas, even on top of Mongo itself, has like dramatically helped us in terms of the speed to go to market.
Perfect. Love that. So I know that Thesis has your Thesis C1, which is the world's first Gen UI API and SDK. Can you tell some of the listeners a little bit about exactly what that is?
Right. So it's a very simple idea that most LLMs just talk in text, and the burden of converting these text-based or JSON-based to real UI interfaces falls a lot on developers, right? So with C1, we think of the UI itself as a part of infrastructure, and we take care of everything between the model itself and your end user application. So that's what C1 does as a high level. The way it works is it's a combination of an LLM middleware plus a generative UI runtime. So the idea here would be that the LLM does not need to generate every pixel of the screen. Right? The LLM at the end is just like generating a high level declarative intent of what that screen should be, and the generative UI runtime, the Thesis SDK, is converting it to a real UI.
Very cool.
And what it does behind the hood is a lot of state management. It's a lot of like context management. It's a lot of like the action management, like what happens when you click a button, what happens when you have like parts of an app that are not AI based and parts of an app that are AI based, what is the bridge between them. So all those things are taken care of by the SDK or the generative UI runtime.
Okay, so I know when we talked about the Thesis C1, we also talked about how it was, the world's first Gen UI API and SDK out in the market. Can we kind of go over why there has never been anything like it before? Like, what has that pain point been for developers or other companies that have been building this? And then how was Thesis able to achieve this goal?
So there are multiple factors that have actually come in together in the last couple of years that have made this possible. Obviously, the biggest of them is LLMs themselves, right? Before LLMs, there was never really a like very general purpose intent understanding engine, right? So like the first precursor to any generative UI implementation would be like the machine understanding intent, right? And so that's only been possible for the last 2-3 years. Secondly, it's also like the web has matured a lot, right? So like 20 years ago, there were like it was not as matured an ecosystem as it is today, right? And there are well understood abstractions of what library like React does, what a design system is, how to bring them together and build these applications. So that has made possible is now LLMs are not really designing pixel by pixel, because even today that would not scale. They are just providing a declarative spec, and because these abstractions of the UI of the web are decently well understood, we are able to convert them to an UI. And it's not like nobody has built this. For example, one of my personal favorite experiments was Claude. Claude released Claude Imagine, I think a month back, right? And what they did was like even an extreme version of what we do. They said like your entire OS is now generated on the fly. So they have this demo where you can just go in and it's almost like a blank slate with a few icons like a text editor and a word editor, etc. And you click on it. But these applications are not hard-coded. Like when you click on that note taker, it actually pops up a application live for you that can do note taking and that like enables you. So that would be like an extreme version of generative UI. We are somewhere in the middle also because we look at it as infrastructure that should help other companies build these interfaces. So for example, like theoretically, there is no reason that you can't do OS with engine like Thesis, but we have optimized it really well for web. And we have optimized it for web-based experience. And in future, we'll do it for like, let's say, more mobile native, like iOS native and Android native experiences. But all these factors together has made this like more than just an experiment to a reality that you can actually touch and feel and experience yourself and see the pros and cons of, right?
Very cool. What are some of your favorite use cases that you've seen from some of your customers using your Thesis C1?
Right. So favorite use cases, I think I wouldn't call it favorite, but a lot of people are using it for analytics. Right? Because analytics is one of those pain points where just reading a wall of 1,000 data points does not really make sense to you. You want to visualize it, you want to see trends in that data, you want to see anomalies in that data. So it's a no-brainer to use a generative UI solution there because anyways your users cannot really read through so much text. But if you ask me my personal favorite, And I personally like this because this is not something that we had thought of or we had optimized the platform for, but somebody just built a very Google Forms like experience using Thesis.
Cool.
So instead of like you having to go and build a form and then share that link with me, what they did was they just like build like a assistant kind of an UI where you can just say, hey, I want to collect everyone's personal detail, everyone's like birth date, etc., etc., and it would generate this form using Thesis, and then they would just like ship out that form to all the other people, and they can just like fill in that form. So I really
Nice.
like this because it shows the power of the platform that
Yeah.
even though it's not really an use case that we are optimized or thought of, it's so extensible that you can do a lot of things that even we didn't think of.
Can you talk a little bit about how building on MongoDB or like a non-relational, very flexible database has enabled you to have that experience with your users where they're able to kind of get up to speed very quickly?
Yeah. So MongoDB serves a lot of purposes within our stack also. Like for example, we definitely use MongoDB like I said before, but we also have these integrations for the end user, the customer application that developers are building with us. And even then we like sometimes recommend them just go with Mongo because of its flexible schema and like the way it naturally scales up with your needs. So compared to like something like a more traditional relation database, like we would have to think through a lot more about, like for example, what migrations are we running when we are changing the contract between different microservices, what kind of like scalability issues, in the sense that if it weren't for Atlas, then we would have to worry about like managing the databases ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And this is a lot of drag for a company like us, for a small startup like us, because we really want to focus on solving the Gen UI part of it, right? Solving the technically hard problems that we are good at, and we want pretty much everything else in our stack to be just working, like almost magic. So Atlas and MongoDB help us get there.
Okay, I love that. It's super cool that you're kind of at this new frontier and in a completely new, like, emerging space. How do you see the future of generative UI? How do you see it evolving and changing over time?
So one of those things I would say is, like, at least in my head and in our head, we are more than confident that this is the future of AI interfaces. And I have this analogy that might seem a little crude, but it's like we started from a terminal-based experience, like in the 80s and the 70s. Everything was very text in, text out, and we were typing stuff, right? And for the next 30 years, there's entire like innovation, this entire research that went into building modern interfaces, what those means, what responsiveness means, etc., etc., is how we got to, like, let's say an Mac, right? And for no good reason, we have kind of regressed back into that terminal-like experience because LLMs can inherently just do text as of today.
Yeah.
Right. So this seems like a very natural evolution of all AI-based interfaces to me, that they will not be so text-heavy. They will be like more natural, more intuitive. Also, the cost of tokens is going down. The speed of inference is going up drastically. So there will be a future where you will not be able to tell a like hard-coded interface apart from like live generative one.
Yeah.
And I think what we are missing right now is also a lot of community effort, right? A lot of consensus. Like the web is the web because the specification of the web itself is a consensus that is agreed upon by like almost everyone right now. But it was not on day one. Like this was also a journey in itself, the consensus of web, right? So those things will emerge more. People will have like competing implementations, obviously, but implementations that are more optimized for very specific niche use cases versus a broad use case like we do. Right? So yeah, that's the next 10 years in our head.
That's awesome. I'm super excited to see it. I'm excited to, see where Thesis goes. So I know that Thesis is part of the MongoDB for Startups program. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience being in the program?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much signed up on the day we closed our round because we knew we were building with Mongo, and like this was a no-brainer for us, and it has really helped us like in terms of credits and like knowing somebody that on the other side can reach out to. Very honestly, we are huge fans of Atlas and like the MongoDB database itself, but Atlas as a managed service. And like I used to joke about this, like one of the few database companies that has got SaaS right is MongoDB because it's so effortless to work with the MongoDB like Atlas and ecosystem that it's a pleasure, and we have really never considered doing it in-house versus like if you ask me that, hey, would you want to host Postgres in-house or look at one of these providers, I would still say, yeah, I mean, maybe I'll host it in-house, right?
Yeah. Okay, I love that. I am just so happy to hear that you've been enjoying it so much and for the last 10 years that you've been using MongoDB. And I'm glad to hear that the new like features and functionalities that are coming out are still, very helpful and resourceful to you. I feel like that's like very important,
Yeah.
especially because your database layer is the one thing that you don't want to think about. You want to kind of have it done and then you don't want to have issues with it or problems with it. We've been saying recently, like the best kind of database layer is the one that you forget about.
Yes.
So I'm glad to see that that like rings true for Thesis especially. But one of my big questions is what advice would you give to other founders that are joining the infra space, especially the AI infra space?
I think the first advice I give to any founder is don't listen to advices, especially not from me. I mean, it's not been long enough that I am in the position to give advice. But yeah, something that I deeply believe in, like this is a very emerging piece of tech and a very emerging market, right? And there are a lot of ways to easily get distracted, like chase the next shiny thing, just pivot from like month to month. That is something that I absolutely believe that once you think that you want to solve this problem, and specifically talking about AI infra, because there's a ton of things that need to be solved because before this becomes like mainstream, to the point that it's not a chatbot versus an application. The chatbot is the application is the chatbot kind of paradigm, and a lot of things need to be solved, including things like embeddings, but including things like generative UI, including things like inferencing, etc. So once you like pick a problem, spend time in it. Don't just chase the next shiny thing. And like this is a 10-year journey, but it's a very exciting 10-year journey.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Rabi. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me. I mean, I know it was on a very short notice, but thanks for accommodating us.
Always. And I'm glad that you're here in San Francisco. I'm glad that we got the opportunity to do this in person in the MongoDB office. It's awesome.
Beautiful office, by the way. I mean,
Oh, thanks.
yeah.